Good morning, everyone. Hope you're all well on this lovely Wednesday morning. My name is Lindo, and I am Client Success Associate at TelmarHelixa, working across Europe, Africa, and Asia. I would like to extend a warm welcome to everyone joining us today. Thank you to everyone who has taken the time to join us this morning for what will be an exciting and insightful webinar. So as you might have seen and know, our speaker today is Brandon de Kock, who is the storyteller director at Y5 Insights. And there's literally no one who knows the survey better than him. Over to you, Brandon. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Linda. So yeah, from my side, thank you all. Thanks all so much for joining us today. Some of you might have seen some of the previous trends, sort of stuff that we've done. This first session, I'm going to try and just cover some very, very general trends about what we think is happening in the consumer landscape out there, and try and just give you a little bit of a background on what BrandMapp is. A lot of you are obviously users. You probably know the data quite well. But it's a fairly useful data set, and we're pretty happy. It's our 12th year of doing this, and we think we've got some interesting stories to tell. So let me jump straight into the presentation. Can you guys all see that? Linda, you can see me full screen? Perfect. Just worried. I'm hoping I don't have the technical glitch. Okay, everybody. So this presentation starts in an interesting place always for me. I just wonder, how's everybody feeling? We're all consumers. We're not just because we're in the media marketing world and we're on a Telmar webinar doesn't mean that we're not part of a greater deal. And I've been starting all my presentations this year with just this idea of like, geez, how are you guys all feeling? It feels like it's been an insane sort of year. And I found this picture, which I feel like it sort of exemplifies how it feels like this is how South Africa's feeling. I'm never quite sure whether I'm the one on the left or the one on the right, but we come out of this crazy year, right? A year of elections, which just threw everything into complete disarray. More recently, we've had the effect of what's happened in America and the greater political scene, which has sort of fairly dramatic effects on our exchange rates and our international relations and all those kind of things. And so we read a lot and we talk a lot about the glass half full, the glass half empty. It feels like we have such a lot to worry about in South Africa as a country, that we often sort of take our eye off what's happening in the total consumer market. It focuses on a piece of the market, that story that is very much a glass half empty, and I'd like to share today with you some thoughts about the other half of the glass. So I'm going to start. It would be letting everyone down who's seen our presentations before if I didn't show you the famous pyramid of income. It's a great place to start because it paints a picture of South Africa that I think is super important. We know a very few things about South Africa. As some of you in the business might know, the census that was done is the thing that almost all data pegs itself or plugs back into census results. And the census wasn't a fantastic success 2 years ago. There were some issues with it. There's some very, very clever people involved in the South African market research world who are trying to help the cause. But we have a guess. So it's the biggest guess we can, and we guess that there are about 43 million adults in South Africa right now. It can't be that far out, but it's probably a good guess. The 3.8 trillion rand in earning is slightly different. That is something that we actually know as a fact. When I say we know it as a fact, it comes from the Treasury Department of South Africa, and Treasury wouldn't lie to us, would they? So well, they can't really lie because they've got to actually spend the money. So if they lie about how much money they've got, it's going to be a little bit tricky to actually do anything. So that's the kind of the two big numbers that we start the story with. And when you take those 43 million adults and you divide them into the households of South Africa by household income, this is the picture that you get. You see that about 70% of all adults, so that's somewhere around about 30 million people, live in households earning less than 10,000 rand a month. This is the true mass market of South Africa. It's an area of considerable stress. Consumers down there really don't have the vast majority of those consumers just don't have very much choice in life. You know, they are trying to satisfy basic needs. 54% of those people rely on social grants to put food on the table. About 25% of them never have enough food to feed the whole family. Never. Another 25% seldom have enough food to feed the whole family. About half of those people down there don't have bank accounts. You know, this is the area where 60% of food that's consumed is not packaged. There's a lot of stress and strain down there. The good news is that about 17 million people down there, 17 million total grants, 15 million estimated individuals are getting social grants, and they're being fed those social grants from a tax system. And you got to ask, like, where does that tax come from? Well, it comes from the tax-paying cohort. And that's what the beginning of the blue portion of this pyramid is. So the next little section, we've called it many things over the years: the middle market, the mid-market, the middle class, which is a very loaded term. So it's about 25% of the total adult population. About 10 million people sit in this bracket of 10 to 40,000 Rand a month household income. And then right at the top, we've got this little group of top enders in South Africa. We call them the top end. Currently, a group of about 3.5, 3.6 million adults living in households earning 40,000 Rand a month or more. The sobering thought is when you take the 3.8 trillion and you divide it up between those pieces of the triangle, you find that the top of the triangle are taking home more than half of all formal income. Okay. The middle market, about 1.3 trillion, and the bottom of the mass market is taking home around about 500 billion in formal market income. Obviously, there's a huge informal trade at play here. We can't ignore that. There's an estimated another like trillion Rand or something like that circulates in the bottom piece of the triangle, but it has to be created somewhere. And our thesis has always been it's created at the top. It's created by the 13.6 million adults who sit at the top of this pyramid. And so that is the work that we've been doing for the last 12 years. We do a massive piece of research every year. We call the result BrandMapp. It is an attempt to help the marketing and media comms sort of industry of South Africa understand these people, understand what's going on in their lives, understand how to reach out and touch them, understand as much as we possibly can about the behavior of this group of people. 13.6 million. That is the BrandMapp audience. So my disclaimer for you, and for anybody who joins late and makes a comment about this, please correct them in the comments box. I'm not talking about the 30 million adults today that sit under the 10K household mark. I'm only talking about the 13.6 million adults who sit in this top piece of the income triangle. Okay, so when I say people or adults or any reference now to any of the work we do, it's only talking about this group of people. You know, it's a fairly large group of people, and importantly, it is 100% of the personal tax base. Personal tax, 37% of the total tax pie of the country, and the next biggest piece of the pie is VAT, and then we land up with corporate tax. And corporate tax effectively sits in the control of these people. So we've always figured it's really, really important to understand this group of consumers. Obviously, there are some goods and services and products in South Africa that are very, very interested in the bottom. Our world here has always been, with the moment you get into a consumer choice environment, what do these people look like? And so we're adopting this year formally the term the SA consumer class to try and describe the BrandMapp universe. Who are these people? We believe it's the consumer class of South Africa. What does that mean? It's a term I first heard used by a man called Professor Haroon Borat, very clever man from UCT, the economics department up there. It was a global study that was done a few years ago by a world data provider. They're trying to work out, you know, what are the group of people in the world who can buy goods and services beyond their basic needs. And they came up with an interesting number back in 2017, 2018 of about $12 a day. If that's roughly your spend, you belong to the consumer class. So it's kind of roughly in this area. That's what we're talking about here. So consumer class South Africans are those adults who can freely buy goods and services over and above their basic needs. And that is what BrandMapp describes, and that's the area, that's our area of expertise. So how is this group of people doing? Let's start with that question. Some of you will be familiar with this chart that I show every year. It comes from the Treasury, the National Treasury Budget Review every year, table 4.5. It's a hell of an interesting place to start any discussion. Those of you who are astute and who watch the news feeds will know that 𝐚𝐿𝐭𝐮 is still like a little reticent to actually publish anything because he's having that little VAT issue, trying to get that through. And until he gets that through, I don't think we'll have the final report. But it has already, some of the charting and some of the ideas in it have already been made public. It's a little fuzzy because it is a low res. It's not off the official document yet. But this is table 4.5, and don't be too befuddled by it. You can go and download the Treasury report yourselves when it comes out and have a good read through it. Effectively, what this gives us is the single most accurate view on personal income in South Africa. So just look at the far two left-hand columns. Down the left-hand side, you've got personal income brackets, not household, personal income brackets. And the registered individuals is exactly what it says. So if you look at the bottom, it means that there are 14.5 million South Africans right now who are registered with the taxman. Of them, about 6.5 million earn less than 100,000 Rand a month. That's what the minimum ceiling has been bumped up to this year. They don't pay any personal tax. The rest of the column there gives you the exact number of people who sit in each of those personal tax brackets. And what it allows us to do is get some sort of a picture relative to that triangle that I just showed you. So we've got sort of three cutoff lines here. The people who earn more than 150,000 Rand a month, personal, is roughly the 10K. Obviously, there's going to be a few more people sitting under it that feed into the 10K household bracket, but this is personal income of 150,000 or more. So that gives us an idea of the estimated number of the total consumer class personal income earners. Okay. The next line is at 350. So that's roughly 30,000 Rand a month personal income. And the bottom line is really interesting. That's the millionaires. That's people who personally earn 80,000 Rand a month or more. And I've been tracking these people for the last 6-7 years to try and understand what the sort of relative shifts in this consumer class of ours could look like. So here's a view of it. It's not a particularly inspiring looking chart because the y-axis is should probably be expanded, but then we'd have to start. I just don't actually know how to do that in Excel or PowerPoint yet. But there's an easy way to explain this. So the blue line is the total consumer class. The second line, the sort of gray-blue line, that is the total number of people who sit within that consumer class who personally earn 30,000 Rand a month or more. And the bottom line is the millionaires class, right? It's the people personally earning $1 million a year or more. You can see there's relative growth here. This is not inflation adjusted, okay? So the point that I always make is that if CPI is running at like between 6 and 7% on average for the last 5 years, this year it's estimated more around about 7%. What you would expect is you would expect this group of people to grow at that level every year in order to keep pace, right? The gross number of people should grow around about whatever CPI sits at. So what has actually happened? Well, if you look at the total consumer class, of course it's grown. You know, we have a population growing at 2% a year. It has grown, but for the last sort of since COVID, it hasn't really kept pace brilliantly. Last year, great job. Last year was a really, really good year in terms of the total consumer class keeping pace with inflationary growth. So we still have 6.2 million total. It's not bad. It was good growth last year. Something good happened. If we look at the slightly wealthier, the slightly higher income group, it looks like this. So this group of people, and it's been our story for the last couple of years, some of you may be familiar with it, we just believe that the group, this isn't the rich getting richer. It means that the group of people who are in the high income brackets is growing quite rapidly and has been for the last 3 years. Incredible comeback after COVID, and then 2 really good years of growth. And last year, even though that growth seems to be slowing in the total number of people who are entering that income group, it's still 6.5%. It's not like it bombed, you know. Even more interesting is the millionaires, because that group has been growing out of all proportion for the last 3 years. And last year, although it dipped again, so it feels like we might have hit a ceiling of some sort, last year, 16% growth. There are 16% more gross income millionaires than there were the year before. It's a very strange story. It's hard to sort of understand, I guess. There's a tendency to say the rich are getting richer. I don't see it that way. I think that the group of people who are earning more is getting larger, and I do think that the people who are earning very high salaries are tending to earn even higher salaries. So the story, in a way, seems to me to be that if you can just get into the consumer class, you stand quite a good chance of growing quite rapidly. There are lots of explanations for this. I often quote the impact of tech on our world. You know, we have much younger people entering the workforce at a much younger age and much higher levels of salary. You've got computer programmers, people who are coming out of college with a qualification in SQL programming and computer software developing, that are looking at salaries of, like, you know, starting salaries of 50,000 plus. It's a completely different world, and I think a lot of that is driving this. I also think that as this group of people has grown, there's a natural kind of increase in the goods and services required to service them. So the higher up you go, it's almost like the better the picture looks. The final way I would show this to you is that, you know, that pyramid I showed you earlier is basically a sort of it's a graphic illustration of the Gini coefficient, right? And, you know, South Africa, we're very good at three things on a global level. We're incredibly good at rugby. We're incredibly good at being the least having the highest level of illiteracy in the world, and we also do win the Gini coefficient as still being the country with the highest level of inequality between rich and poor. I'm not being flippant about it. It's something we all need to worry about desperately. But it's a good mechanism to understand, because what we think has happened in this consumer class is that the Gini coefficient, in a way, is starting to happen in the middle class as well, as it's grown to, you know, near 14 million people. What this is showing you is, if you take the total group of people who sit in the consumer class, what is the relative percentage of people who sit in these different income bands? So if you go back to 2020, 56% of the total consumer class were people sitting in the 10 to 30K band. Fast forward to 25, and you can see that number shifted quite dramatically. A 10% shift out of a group of 13.6 million adults in South Africa is a fairly massive shift in the size and shape, or not the size, it's more the shape of this consumer class. So it just means that the people, once you get a job, once you're in the consumer class, it looks like you've got a really, really good chance at a fairly bright future. And that in itself, I think, should be kind of good news for all of us. Because, as I said, these are the people who are feeding money into the bottom of that triangle, you know. So long may it last. It does look like it's slowed down a little bit, but not massively. And I think as long as we can fight off the scourge over the pond, and as long as we can fight back a little bit as a consumer market, you know, there's a group of people in South Africa who are ready and waiting to pull the economy along like a chariot. Okay, that's my good luck story. What does this all mean for the consumer, for the general landscape? You know, what are the kind of things that we see happening? The first thing that's important to understand is that we have been telling the demographic shift story in South Africa for the last 10 years. We saw it coming, and boy, is it upon us. You know, we are a youthifying society. It's a long time ago now that I remember standing in boardrooms of South Africa and saying, you know, you guys always talk about your youth strategy. Do you understand that your strategy is now your youth strategy? If you want to have a boomer strategy, you can have one as well. But your main strategy needs to be very much focused on a younger consumer. To illustrate the point, if you go back 10 years ago when we started looking at this group of people, the mean age, so the point at which there were as many people under as there are over, was round about 45. This year, that number sits closer to 37. So this market is getting much, much younger. And that brings with it a whole lot of very, very interesting things that can happen in the marketplace. So first of all, how are these people feeling in general? Well, we can answer that. So the way that these charts, I'm now going to run you through a bunch of infographics, bar charts. The bar chart is still, for me, one of the simplest and easiest ways to just view data. So I haven't tried to be clever here and turn anything into a clever infographic. They're all just bar charts. These trend charts show you the full total consumer class result for the last 4 years. Okay, and what we're looking for here are sort of slopes and shapes that tell stories. Very, very simple question. Compared to 2 years ago, how are you feeling financially? It's super broad. We're just trying to get a sort of a pulse check. And that's the result. So you can see that things are not that bad. I mean, I would say that if you take those far three columns, you add them together, that is 64% of consumer class South Africans right now saying that they're feeling the same or actually better off. You know, for 41% of them to say I'm a bit better off or much better off. There's a perception in their lives that in these people's lives, in the consumer class life, that things aren't that bad. Yes, there are some who are much worse off. I can tell you that tends to be the kind of people on the bridge of proper wealth who may be overextending themselves a little bit. But in general, you know what? We think the consumer class is actually doing okay. And that's a good thing, as I said, because the country as a whole, 100% of personal tax relies on these people feeling okay. We hear a hell of a lot about debt and levels of debt in South Africa. I'm a little bit cautious about the debt issue. I feel like a lot of the data that is used is probably misused, and it's used for nefarious purposes. We have a very simple way of trying to measure this, and we've asked the same question, year on year. And I can tell you that from our view, it doesn't feel like these consumer class adults are up to their eyeballs in debt. In fact, it feels like, as an educated, highly educated group of South Africans, which is why they're part of the consumer class, it feels like debt is way more of a tool than it is a noose around their necks. That said, this is the trend for the last 4 years. We ask a simple statement: which of these are most true about how you feel in debt? You'll see that not having any debts has definitely decreased over the years. But if you look at the level, the rate of increase of what we term debt stress, so I reckon debt stress is people saying, I'm very worried or my debt's out of control. Right now we're talking about less than 30% of consumer class adults are debt stressed. Feeling nervous about my debts and the effect that losing my job would have is a completely different thing. That's just nervous. That's totally understandable. But actual debt stress levels, we see at around 30% and just under 30%. I think it is an important mechanism to understand that debt becomes a tool when you understand debt better, and debt tends to happen to most people in the sort of the middle of life, right? The parental, the breeding generation. They're the ones who absorb quite a lot of debt. And they tend to be highly educated in the consumer class, and because of that, they're able to use that debt to their advantage. So we think, in general, financially speaking, the consumer class came out of last year not feeling too bad, and they certainly haven't had to borrow themselves up to their eyeballs. The changing shape that we're seeing here, these movements in kind of younger people coming in, a shift to a sort of a much larger group of wealthier consumers, doesn't mean that there aren't all sorts of sort of socioeconomic and legacy factors at play. So as this consumer class has been growing, we start to see some really, really interesting shapes in their overall behavior. And remember, whenever you look at these charts, you're talking about a group of 13.5 million people. So a fluctuation of 10% is close to 2 million people. It's the moment you start seeing large shapes, they could be quite profound. Here's an example. We all know, and you've seen in lots of press about the success of Capitec over the last couple of years. We believe that Capitec is one of those brands it's being drawn into this consumer class in the most amazing way. You'll see that this is primary bank. We do know that South Africa is a multi-bank society, so this is just primary bank. Look at the difference between those two. FNB has been the sort of the king of this segment of the consumer class for many, many, many years. And finally, we see a little bit of a shift. It doesn't mean that FNB is losing customers. It doesn't mean that they're doing badly. It just means that relative to this shift to a newer, younger consumer, they're possibly not holding their heads. And the guys who are winning out of it are Capitec. So I guess from a brand point of view, I think we should, if we're all trying to service consumers and we're all trying to do a better job, there are some brands that are worth looking at. Look at the style of communication. What are the lessons that they've learned that we can all learn from? And for us, a shape like that shows that Capitec, for example, is definitely one of those brands. We also know that as these this new group of consumers has entered, and now, you know, we used to talk about the emerging middle class. It's emerged, right? It's here, it's with us, 13.6 million people. And those new customers into this market are going to bring new habits sort of fairly slowly over time. There's been so much said about the battle of the aisles, as I call it, you know, the grocery segment. Let me start off by saying that, you know, there's been quite a lot of jibes made at Pick n Pay of late. You know, they're obviously in a company that's struggling to re-strategize and reformulate what their business plan should look like. I don't think any of us should take any joy at all in something like the relative lack of performance of a brand like Pick n Pay. These are the people who feed our nation. Without all of them doing well, there are going to be a whole lot of people out of jobs, and there are going to be a whole lot of people who struggle, or even more than they currently do, to actually put food on their table. Literally, from a physical point of view, when you look at consumers whose shopping behavior is very, very much limited by geography and by physical ability to get to stores, the last thing we need is, you know, grocers closing down. Nevertheless, the story here is really interesting. You can see the rise of Checkers. What I think is really interesting about this is look at the relative rise of ShopRite. So for me, what the story there from a brand point of view, and this is just my story, guys. It's the fact is the fact. My story is my story. I think ShopRite's a fascinating brand because it has been a protector and nurturing brand for so many people in the last 10 years who have entered the consumer class. That I think there's still huge brand equity for them. Even if it's a sister shop, and even if Checkers is almost going to be a step up, it doesn't mean that we can't see a fairly significant increase in that brand value in the total consumer class. So new customers are going to bring new habits, and the changes can happen quite fast. You know, these are not nominal shifts; these are fairly rapid shifts. And I think that's the other thing to understand about this group of consumers, because they're younger consumers. That's great for everybody. It's great that we're shifting younger, because younger people eat more, do more, buy more clothes, play more, do more in life. They're more active. They're better consumers, right? And it means that we're gonna see some other sort of interesting shifts. So what's one of the biggest driving factors behind consumer behavior right now? I think it's neatly summed up by this word. You know, again, it's a concept, it's a subject we've been talking about for a long time. We used to see convenience as a very much a mobility factor. So in the old days, when we said, why do you shop where you shop most often for groceries? Convenient location just came up, you know, the top of the pops. That number's been dropping gradually over the years. Convenience has shifted. What convenience means to us has shifted. And we see it in some very obvious places. Here's the chart this year for the impact of those guys in the green blue on the motorbikes. It's quite a radical result. You know, it's amazing to think that 5 years ago, none of us were doing this. You know, 5 years ago, I think Pick n Pay had bottles, and it was literally like delivering booze. If you go back to 2021, we've got about 80% of people saying they don't use any delivery services. Look at that radical shift. You know, 36% is absolutely enormous. More interesting, I guess, is if you look at the total footprint, 52% of people saying I don't use any of them. So we're very, very close to the point, and next year we will definitely breach the mark. We're at the point where more than half of the consumer class of South Africa are using grocery delivery services at least once a month. It's a total game changer, this, for me. I think that we can focus on groceries, but just the expectation created in the consumer mind and the way people think about how brands service them and the kind of things that they are needing and looking for out of being serviced as consumers has changed completely. It's all about convenience, convenience, convenience. These thoughts, you'll see we'll tie back into another thought later. You know, what are the other things that this does in terms of consumer behavior? We think it ties into a really big story about how people are choosing to live their lives and how they're living their lives to deal with the rising cost of living. It's coming up in a sec. There are some other interesting shifts. It would be remiss of me not to show you this one. So obviously in BrandMapp, we measure the usual SEM measures so that we can get an account of the SEM groups in the data. And when you ask about SEMs, you've got to ask sort of 16 odd questions. And one of those questions is, which of these things do you have in your house? It's things like a tiled floor and a tiled roof and a fridge freezer and stuff like that. And within it, here are two interesting ones. Look at the level of car ownership in households. I think that definitely has bearing on a youthifying a consumer class with slightly different approach to things like car ownership and house ownership. Why, if you don't use cars that often, why not use Uber rather than paying insurance and fuel every month? Something like microwave oven, however, like no difference at all. So where do we see some big shifts? Well, because it's our survey and we can do what we want, we included in that list of SEMs, we chuck in some other interesting measures, like do you have a swimming pool? Do you have a home security service? Just measures of household materialism that we can then use to try and paint deeper and wider pictures of these guys. And one of the things that I put in a few years ago was air fryers, because in another world, I'm quite involved in the food and beverage world, and I think the air fryer story is absolutely fascinating. If you go back to 2021, we didn't actually measure it. We put it into the data for the first time in 2022, and we discovered 26% of people had an air fryer in the home. So same as Checker 6060, we are very, very close to the point where you are more likely to find an air fryer in a consumer class household than you aren't. I say perform miracles, of course, because these people have found a way to fry in air. Remarkable. Anyhow, the point about this, again, it ties back into that convenience thing. Just imagine how this changes consumer behavior, how it changes their expectations. If you go into a Woolworths or a Pick n Pay or a Checkers right now, just look and see how many stickers say perfect for air fryer. 3 years ago, it was maybe 10% of products. Now there are some shelves that just seem to be completely for air fryers. The good news for those of you that don't have an air fryer, if you still have a very, very good convection oven, you can do the same thing. It just takes a bit longer. I think the impact of this is going to be felt in years to come. The idea of standing in the kitchen and keeping mum company while she, cooks a spaghetti bolognese, they may be a thing of the past for the vast majority of the next generation growing up. What's going to happen? We don't know, but I can almost assure us all that this kind of thing will have bearing on future consumer behavior in the same way that it already has direct effect on what they actually choose to buy and how they're selecting something as simple as the food that they cook. And the last little trend slide I wanted to show you is just this one. We have another webinar coming up talking about media, but just to try and show you how fast things can happen in this new consumer environment that we exist in. It's a simple metric. Which of these social media platforms do you regularly use? You'll see that Facebook's finally starting to take a bit of a hit. My personal feeling is that young people are only on Facebook to keep a grip on what their parents are doing. That's just my theory. But look at the rest of these. Instagram had a hell of a year coming out of COVID. I think there was a lot of people on Insta. It took a little bit of a dip. It's kind of not doing too badly, sitting around the same. LinkedIn in the consumer class has always been a pretty powerful channel. But look at the difference between Twitter and TikTok. I mean, that growth is just absolutely ridiculous. So the interesting thing about that is if you put an age filter on it, you'll find that even like the CEOs and C-suite executives in companies, even 25, 26% of them are on TikTok. This is not a youthful platform anymore. Although there's a youth skew, obviously, but it's not confined to the youth. TikTok has become ubiquitous. We think there's still room for growth, depending on what happens with Donald Trump in China. But it's an enormously powerful platform. More interesting is look at how quickly the landscape here has changed. So we live in a constantly evolving, rapidly changing market. From a media point of view, I can't help thinking that I come out of the print industry. My DNA is deeply embedded in dead trees flattened out to make little pages in things we used to call magazines. And it always occurred to us back then that the idea of printed news was starting to become a little bit of a sort of contradiction in terms. But boy, are we fast approaching a time where, like it's all the moment it happens, the impact of AI on this whole world, on the world of consumer information, on our news. We have no idea what's going to happen, but I can tell you one thing, it's going to happen fast. it's going to happen as fast as something like the TikTok chart that you're seeing there. So end result of this, we're going into just about every client meeting at the moment saying, from a media strategy point of view, you definitely need to have TikTok in your mix. The final stat I'll give you on that is we heard the other day a stat saying that 5 years ago, around 60% of consumers under the age of 35 used YouTube as their primary search engine. And now 60% of people under the age of 35 use TikTok as their primary search engine. Before they go to Google, they'll go to TikTok. Okay,
Brandon, I'm one of them.
Are you? Well, Linda,
Yeah.
there you go. I mean, isn't it crazy? It's like it just didn't exist that long ago, and now it's like a
Literally.
primary search engine.
Literally.
Excellent. I'm glad I've got a case study of one to prove the point. Okay, so tied up in all of these things, we thought we would want to try and get a measure this year on for the first time we asked a simple question, which was, which of these things are you likely to do to deal with the rising cost of living? There's a thesis that sits behind this, which is if younger people are growing up in this slightly different environment where, Netflix costs $160 a month, where you can have, Mr. D delivered to your door, and we know that about 60% of them use the Mr. D Uber Eats sort of environment, where you can call an Uber to your door if you do want to go out quickly. You can have Checker 6060 delivering all your stuff. Like, how has this affected the way people are going to live their lives in order to react to the changing environment? So this was the simple question. Which of the following things are you likely to do this year to deal with the rising cost of living? And this was the kind of bottom part of the answers to that question. About 20% of people saying cancel DSTV. We know there's been a hell of an impact on DSTV in the last sort of 18 months or so. Some of these things should come as a warning. Some of them should come just as I would say, strategic guideposts for people in these different industries. Look at stay at home for the holidays, 16%. Cancel my gym membership, only 10% of people. Taking out a loan, 2%. Important. Remember back to that debt chart that we showed you. It's like, doesn't seem like a good idea. These are intelligent people. They know that that's not a good way. So these were the little guys. There's lots of ways that people found to stretch their budgets. But we think that the habits that we learned in COVID look like the best places for consumers to start. So in some ways, I almost wanted to, I was thinking of pitching this whole presentation as like, welcome to long COVID, the South African consumer view. What are the things that happened in COVID that we're now starting to see a big effect on? The hybrid work stories, all of those things. So here are the top 6 things that people ticked as things that they're likely to do to deal with the rising cost of living. First of all, cut down on clothing purchases. I remember the beautiful days of Zoom calls during COVID where people started off looking normal. And by the end of COVID on Zoom calls, there were people literally in their pajamas and in like 𝐚𝐿𝐭𝐮𝐿 and T-shirts. I think we all learned a lesson about how important sort of some material things in lives were. So 35% of them saying cutting down on clothing purchases has a fairly massive impact, or would have a fairly massive impact on the retail segment in South Africa. I guess it means there's an onus on these brands and service providers and retailers to know that it's not a fear, it's not a burning platform idea. It's just that if that's a thought in consumers' minds, I think everybody's got to work a little bit harder. Going out less to movies and restaurants, and look at the 2 down, staying at home more often. There's 2 slightly different things. Given the picture that I just painted, the Netflix world, why not? Why not stay at home? It's like almost a better time than going out. If you can have your favorite fast food delivered, and you can sit in front of your 42-inch high-res screen and you can watch Netflix movies. So we think that there are quite a lot of good stories to come out of this data. For those of you that use the data, it's obviously interesting to go into these segments and go, can we profile them? Can we take these groups of people and go, what's the difference? Is there a young, old differentiation between these groups? Is there a gender difference? Also, quite importantly, right at the bottom there, 24%, so the 6th biggest box ticked, likely to change where I shop for groceries. That's interesting. It doesn't mean they're going to stop shopping at one place and start shopping at another. It just means that for the average consumer class, consumer is shopping at 3.5 different grocery stores. It just means that those habits are likely to change between where they shop more often than not. So again, brilliant challenge for the grocery retail industry. How do we get a little bit of a bigger share of wallet? And then here, just two little nuggets of information for you. We measure malls in the BrandMapp data. We find it a very useful way of segmenting consumers by their consumer mobility. So, where you live is one thing. Postal code is relatively useful. How far you're willing to go to shop, that arguably is a better indicator of your consumer mobility in the consumer class. And we still measure mall culture as being absolutely massive. If you look at the average Johannesburg consumer class adult, they tick a box to say, I regularly visit 6 different shopping malls. In the Western Cape and in KZN, with far fewer malls and a completely different mall landscape, that number drops quite sharply, about 4, roughly 3.5 to 4. But in Jozi, 6 different malls. That's the number of different malls regularly visited. And we've got a few other fun little things to paint the mall picture. One of them, a new measure for this year, we just thought it'd be interesting to try and get a measure on where people are connecting to Wi-Fi hotspots. We thought that stuff like the restaurant, coffee shop might be interesting. Shopping malls I didn't see coming, but 26% of consumer class adults are saying that they regularly connect to free Wi-Fi at shopping malls. I think there's a lovely story in that, because it talks to me of those shopping malls not just realizing that they still play a big part in their consumers' lives, but clearly they're responding quite well to consumer needs. Because if you don't have Wi-Fi these days, wherever you are, you feel a little lost. They don't want people to feel lost, and they've done a hell of a good job. I think that's a pretty massive footprint. Allied to that, this shopping habit, there is also a lot of data to say that although footfall is up in malls, actual, ringing of tills is potentially a little bit down. I don't have access to that kind of data. I've seen those stories. I still think that the idea of the mall is central to consumer behavior, absolutely central. And allied to that is this idea that the part of the long COVID is just a gradual sort of reintegration into society. One day, I'll be standing in an auditorium with all of you again, having this discussion. We are slowly moving back. And we have a measure in the data, which is our live events measure, that I just think shows that this statement is possibly true, that our appetite for human connection is back and it's strong. Which of these live events are you likely to attend in the next year? 60% of people saying food markets. We've seen that before, where food markets have always featured very, very highly in the consumer class. They do love a little food market, the farmer's market. But look how high the rest of these numbers are. Almost half, 45% of people saying music concerts, food and wine festivals, 40% saying a live sports event. Live events are absolutely massive in the consumer class of South Africa. Now, these are people who have earned the right to be entertained, like in the Colosseum, and they do so with aplomb. New one this year, we chucked in there watching a live sport event at a bar, pub, or tavern, and 26% of total population ticking that box, total BrandMapp population. I think it's just there's a lovely story to be told there about the importance of something like live sports events and bar culture or tavern culture in the consumer class of South Africa. Definitely a hot spot. So let me finish off with this thought for you. If we know that this consumer class is growing, it's changing, it's shifting, we have been calling this group of people, I said emerged and emerging earlier. I think we're well past that. This was a term that was offered to me by a friend and colleague a few years ago. The idea of just understanding a new to category consumer. So somebody who doesn't necessarily have the brand and service and product legacy of 3 or 4 or 5 generations, but has a new legacy. How about if we call them new to category consumers rather? It doesn't mean that they are stupid. These are highly intelligent, highly educated people. They may simply just be ignorant, as in they just don't know because it's not part of brand legacy in their lives. So how should we handle new to category consumers? And the message that we bring, our work is not called BrandMapp without reason. We believe that the role that branding, marketing, communications, and advertising has to play in this group of people is absolutely fundamental. I think that I look at brands as signposts. That's what they are. The new to category consumer is just looking for a lot of guidance and is looking for a lot of information and is looking for some sort of good advice. And brands are one of those things that satisfies quite a lot of that area. This is a view of one of the metrics. I've obviously deleted 3/4 of the actual brands we measure. I just thought I'd pick out some for you. So the question here is, which of these clothing and footwear brands do you own? And I've run it against generations, right? Gen Z, millennials, Gen X, and boomers. And what we're looking for here are obvious shapes. So if you look at the far left-hand side, what's interesting is that 56% of Gen Zs are likely to tick the I've got Nike in my cupboard, right? Whereas only 22% of boomers being 60, boomers plus is 55 plus, only 22% of boomers have Nike in their closets. Look at Nike versus Adidas on the far left-hand side. Really interesting to see, a brand that has clearly got a more youthful appeal. And you'd think that these two things sit in the same kind of in the same area of the market, and they very much do. But there's two very, very different brand stories to be told there. Well, whatever Nike's doing, they're giving younger consumers clearly a far different signpost to Adidas. Some of those brands like Vans and Puma, also, we see different shapes in them. They're doing different things differently. They're signposting correctly to get a younger consumer. And then some of the guys on the right-hand side, much smaller brands, but they certainly show these interesting kind of shapes where it seems to me that possibly the signposts aren't pointing in the right direction if they're trying to go for the new to category consumer. It's just it's an attempt to show you how within the BrandMapp data we can start seeing the effect that brand has. Brand really, I do believe, has a massive, massive influence on the new to category consumer. And the last little insight I'd like to share with you is this one. We ask quite a lot of questions in BrandMapp about the effect of media awareness, what drives people to the news they go and search for. And I will be speaking a lot more about media in our webinar in 2 weeks' time, where we focus on media and the trends. I thought I'd just drop one in for you just to show you. So here is the same view, that the generational view. The question, in the last 6 months, which media channels have carried an advert that actually made you go out and buy something? It's quite a hard question to answer, I always thought, but actually it turns out not, and particularly not for younger consumers. Look at the right-hand side. The older you get, the less likely you are to admit that advertising has any kind of effect on you. But 80% of Gen Zs, 80% of millennials recognize the effect that advertising has on them. We've always believed and told the story that for that new to category consumer, an advert is even better than a signpost. It's actually information. It's not necessarily advertising. Yes, they're far more likely to be responding to the digital platforms. Those are quite big numbers. When 32% of TikTok users are in the Gen Z environment or segment are recognizing that they saw an ad on TikTok that actually made them go and buy something, you got to know how powerful those digital platforms are. But look at the traditional guys even. They're still ranking. They're still doing quite well. Bottom line, we believe that advertising, branding, the whole world of communications that we're all a part of is just a vital, vital tool for the new to category consumer. And if the new to category consumer is now the majority of the consumer class of South Africa, it means that you've got to start taking all of those things, not more seriously, but just understand how important the job is that all of us do, all of you do in this world in terms of guiding consumers to make better choices and to make good choices. So what's the bottom line? I'll leave you with a simple thought. In this fast shifting world, when you look at the brands who are winners and losers, I think the rule here is that you can't stand still. That's it. We live in too fast a moving world. It's certainly not some unique, brilliant thought of Brandon's. You've heard this often, I'm sure, from a lot of different people over the course of the years. But right now, given what I've just shown you, we all need to understand quite deeply that if you stand still, you will be overtaken. This is a classic Chinese proverb. Be not afraid of going slowly, just be afraid of standing still. And I think as people involved in the branding, marketing, media world in South Africa, that is a key take home for me this year. Make sure that you just do something to respond. Don't sit and think that everything's going to be okay if you just hang about. Cool. That's it. That's all I have to offer you. You guys, a lot of you probably are BrandMapp users and BrandMapp data. You probably know the data quite well. Um, and myself and Julianne are here to help you dig into it at any time and try and tell some of those sort of stories that I've just told you with your particular client or brand lens on.